Hello, everyone, and welcome to the New Jersey Division on Civil Rights Community Listening Session on hashtag AAPI Hate. Know your civil rights, use your voice, create pathways for healing. Before we get started, I'd like to run through a few housekeeping items so you all know how to participate in this evening's event. First off, if you experience any technical difficulties, please explain your problem through the chat feature at the bottom, and I'll try my best to help you address the issue. Immediately following the panel discussion this evening, any attendees who wish to obtain support or resources for your mental health regarding these issues may join a separate safe space room at 8:30 p.m. The safe space will be provided on a separate Zoom link in the chat feature towards the end of tonight's program. You'll be joined in the safe space by a mental health professional. The safe space is not to provide counseling, but to provide available resources. If you also have a question at any point during these sessions, please type them in the Q&A portion of your control panel. We will collect these and address them during our discussions, with similar questions being combined. Please note that inappropriate or offensive questions will not be announced, and due to time constraints, please keep them all on topic. Again, it's at the Q&A pane at the bottom of your control panel. Oral remarks will be limited to 2 minutes per person in the audience, and the host reserves the right to mute and remove, if applicable, any individual who goes over the allotted time and uses profanity or derogatory or offensive language. Lastly, please subscribe to New Jersey OAG on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram for the latest on information, news, and resources from our offices. You can also follow Division of Civil Rights on Facebook and Twitter at Civil Rights NJ. And now I'd like to hand things off to our first speaker tonight, who is Jeff Chang from AAPI Montclair. Jeff?
Thanks, Whitney. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to this important Know Your Rights webinar brought to us by the New Jersey Division on Civil Rights within the Attorney General's Office. I'm Jeffrey Chang, a board member of AAPI Montclair in Essex County, a community organization formed shortly after the horrific attacks in Atlanta and in the surge of anti-Asian bias incidents. It is hard to imagine, but in just 8 months, AAPI Montclair has grown from just 5 people to 50 to now over 500 members. AAPI Montclair is proud to partner with the Division on Civil Rights to bring this program to you. For many of us, the past 2 years have been very difficult as we fear for our safety and the safety of our loved ones, all the while confronting a global pandemic. Sadly, the pandemic of anti-Asian racism is not new. We remember not too long ago the attacks on members of our South Asian, Sikh, and Muslim communities after September 11th, and sadly, still occur. We also know all too well that discrimination and bias take shape in so many ways and in so many places, from being paid less at work or not getting that promotion, to being bullied at school or getting denied an evaluation for your child, to someone yelling a slur as we go to our place of worship or simply walking on the street. And that discrimination takes a toll on our physical and mental health, as we will talk more about how to take care of ourselves and our loved ones. First and foremost, we want you to know that we have rights and that the law is there to protect all of us. Tonight, we will learn how to recognize, respond, and report a civil rights complaint. And there will also be an opportunity to ask questions. We are so fortunate to have a civil rights agency and Attorney General's office, which takes our rights very seriously and cares deeply about the Asian community. I want to thank all of our incredible speakers tonight, and a big thank you to the Outreach and Community Relations Unit, especially to Dr. Denalery Johnson-Fennell, Patricia Williamson, Libby Klein, and Tisha Leonardo Santiago. Please know you are never alone. You can always turn to the Division on Civil Rights, and beyond that, to our very own communities for support. And we too have to create and participate in opportunities to be seen, to be heard, and come together. Over the past 2 years, amidst such pain and grief, we have seen the tremendous resilience and strength of our AAPI community, which is officially 1 million strong in New Jersey. Tonight, we will also be sharing information about groups and resources and the many inspiring ways you can take action. Please reach out and connect. There are so many people, including myself and AAPI Montclair, who are here for you and are at your side. Thank you, and now I'll turn it over to Denalery.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Greetings, I am Dr. Denalery Johnson-Fennell, and I'm the Chief of Outreach and Community Relations at DCR. Together, we stand united on Lenni Lenape Native land and in support of racial justice. This is the intersection of a pandemic, health equity, and the well-being of New Jersey communities. On behalf of our speakers, our community partners, the staff at DCR, and our director, Rachel Weiner-Apter, we thank all of you for joining us for this very important community event. We are centering the needs of the AAPI community and ensuring that mental health is discussed. We want to offer you an opportunity to learn more about DCR and our units and the services, as well as an opportunity to engage with our community partners and our speakers. The New Jersey Division on Civil Rights is the state agency that is charged with enforcing New Jersey's civil rights laws. This includes the 1945 New Jersey LAD and the New Jersey Family Leave Act. The mission of DCR is to protect the people of New Jersey from discrimination and bias-based harassment, specifically in employment, housing, and public accommodations. DCR's enforcement and legal units have a team of neutral investigators who review complaints of discrimination and bias-based harassment. We also have a strategic initiatives and enforcement unit, and that team of attorneys helps us to draft statutory amendments and regulations that also enforce AAPI-related community legal documents. We have an education and training unit, and that team works to proactively educate the public about the law against discrimination and how to recognize acts of discrimination and bias-based harassment. That's done through virtual as well as in-person trainings. DCR's Community Relations Unit is a team of specialists that work to prevent these acts of bias and discrimination. And we do that through events such as this, resource development and dissemination of information and our community engagement. We specifically look to partner with the AAPI community and enhance our outreach efforts. This particular event is sponsored by the Crew. We affectionately call ourselves the Crew, the Community Relations Unit, and we are the proactive arm of DCR. Tonight, we want to assist you with collaborations, partnerships, referrals, public education, as well as working directly on the mental health aspect and centering the AAPI community after civil rights events and incidents have occurred. Examples of our initiatives not only include conferences and presentations, but also centering trauma-informed practices, mental health outreach, community mediation, restorative justice, listening sessions, and courageous community dialogues. Again, if you would like to partner with us, we welcome you to follow us on our website, njcivilrights.gov, and also reach out to us to share your personal stories. We want to hear directly from you. You can contact us at communityrelations@njcivilrights.gov. Additional information and resources will be dropped into the chat, and we have a wealth of knowledge that's going to be shared with you this evening. I am so glad to invite our speakers to speak their truth, and the same with our community members. At the end of tonight's event, you will also have the opportunity to join us in a safe and brave space at 8:30 p.m. That link will be shared for those that want to continue the dialogue in a courageous way and discuss how we can stop AAPI hate. At this time, again, I want to thank the entire Crew, DCR, and all of our partners. We want to invite you to join us tonight. And at this time, I want to say thank you to Laura Fong, who will bring us some greetings at this intergenerational event. And she will provide some remarks specifically as our Assistant Attorney General and Chief Diversity Officer for the Department of Law and Public Safety. At this time, I turn it over to Laura Fong. And again, I thank all of our panelists and speakers, and special thank you to Patricia Williamson and the Crew.
Great, thank you so much, Denalery. Thank you to the crew, and thank you for all of the speakers here who have joined in putting this program together. And I thank you, all of the participants who have joined in the audience. It's my pleasure to be here with you today. As Denalery indicated, my name is Laura Fong. I am an Assistant Attorney General, and I serve as the Chief Diversity Officer in the Office of the Attorney General. It's my pleasure to be here with you today, and I'm just going to set the table a little bit to talk broadly about the Asian American experience and give some historical and legal perspective, as well as share some information about demographics and about bias. So when we talk about Asians in this country, I want to share with you the very first United States Census report. And you can see that 80% of the people who were reported to be in the United States at that time were considered white. And there are three different categories of white females, white males, over and under 16. And then enslaved people were 18% of the population. Everyone else was only 1% of the population. But what we do know is that as far back as over 400 years ago, in 1587, there was an early arrival from the Philippines of sailors who landed in Morro Bay, California. So that's the first documented existence of Asians arriving in the United States. And there were a number of different settlements from the Philippines thereafter. And then a significant wave of immigration from Southern China in the 1850s with respect to coming for the California Gold Rush, and then being a significant force in the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad. And then in the 1870s, what we saw was a lot of economic challenges and scapegoating of Chinese as part of that phenomenon. In the 1880 United States Census, you can see that the population was majority white, 86.5%, 13% Black, a nominal representation of Native Americans, and then two categories of Asians were collected and reported in that 1880 census. Chinese were reported at 0.2% of the total US population, and the Japanese population was even less than that. But the concentration of Chinese in the United States was in the West Coast, and they represented about 8.7% of California's population. What do we know as a result of that? Well, there was a lot of anti-Chinese resentment that was stirred up by the presence, the very large presence and relatively sudden presence of Chinese in California. And that led to the enactment of targeted anti-Chinese immigration laws. First in 1875 was the Page Act, which targeted Chinese women on the pretext that they were sex workers. And then that was followed by the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act. It was an absolute bar to Chinese laborers coming into the United States. And it was enacted originally for only 10 years, but it was repeatedly by federal action extended and put in effect until 1943, a total of 61 years. It was even enhanced by the addition of the requirement that Chinese in America be required to carry residence identification so that they could establish to anyone who stopped them that they were properly in the United States. And the penalty for not having that was incarceration, hard labor, and thereafter deportation. There was a number of different anti-Asian and not just anti-Asian, but very focused immigration laws that were really intent on architecting the American population so it was largely white, Protestant, and from Northwestern Europe. The Immigration Act of 1917 was something that created what was called the Asiatic Barred Zone. And what that did was, in addition to expanding the Asian countries that were not permitted to send people to the United States, it also identified near Asian countries. and it remained the law until the Naturalization Act of 1952 eliminated racial restrictions. In 1921, there was this thing called the National Origins Formula that was put in place. And that was very, very focused on putting caps that took the American population back to 30 years prior in terms of what the representation of the different demographic groups were. And that remained in effect until 1965. The net effect of that legislation was that most of the representation of the population was from Western Europe. And you can see that the green section is that demographic. There was a long history of anti-Asian violence and acts in this country. It's not a recent phenomena. In the 1800s, there was a veritable war against Chinese in America, and there were continuous violent acts that resulted in many, many people being murdered or physically assaulted. 1907 saw the notorious Bellingham Riots, where in Bellingham, Washington, where South Asian Sikh migrant workers were imprisoned and then driven out of the city. And of course, there is the ignominious incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II, where over 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry, about 62% of whom were US citizens, were rounded up, deprived of their property, and incarcerated. It wasn't until 1965 until we saw significant reform in our immigration laws. And that really opened up the floodgates to immigration into the United States from Asia. What the overall impact was that the annual immigration numbers jumped dramatically, and only 20% came from Europe. So where are we now? Our population demographics, you can see from these charts, United States in 1965 was, actually I see the graphic is a little funny in the way it's displaying right now. I can't tell you why, but the population was at that time about 84% white, and the Asian representation was negligible. Contrast that with the latest census figures from 2020, we can see that the representation of Asians in America is about 60%. And so that's a significant change. What we also know is that New Jersey leads the country. It's among the top 5 states in seeing the sustained numeric increase in the Asian population. We've got 377,000 increase in the Asian population in the period between 2010 and 2019. And what we also know is that in New Jersey, among all the different demographic groups, the Asian American population is the fastest growing group in New Jersey, comprising over 1 million people in our population, representing about 11% of our population, and growing from the period 2010 to 2020 by about 32%. And what do we know about bias with respect to the Asian American community? Well, I want to be clear that there's explicit bias, which is that bias that people know about, that they admit to, that's an organizing principle for those hate groups that we're so very concerned about. But then there's this other kind of bias, which is unconscious bias, implicit bias. And that is something that's fueled by stereotypes and associations that get internalized, and people are not even conscious that they're operating, acting, saying things based on this implicit bias. The fact of the matter is we all have implicit bias. We can be implicitly biased against our own groups, but it is a very, very important form of bias that influences actions that can be very hurtful and damaging. When we talk about stereotypes and associations, we know that as we walk through lives, we're subject to all sorts of inputs that create mental shortcuts that sort of fuel these implicit biases. So what are the biases that there are? What are the stereotypes that exist about people who are Asian? Well, we know that there's this perpetual foreigner stereotype, and that's been documented by research, that no matter how long people of Asian background have been in the United States, they're still seen as foreigners. I myself am a fourth generation American, but I still am asked on a regular basis, where are you from? And when I say New Jersey, people will say, no, where are you really from? We also know that Asian women have been objectified as sex objects, and the tragic, horrific murders that took place in Atlanta are an example of that. Men have been typecast as meek and passive, and we know that overall, Asian people have been portrayed as evil or sinister. So these are some of the stereotypes and associations in our society here that we have to deal with, and those are perceptions that people have. Now, Asian Americans, however, have had a different kind of perception. And when we look at the events of the past 18, 20 months with respect to COVID-19, we know that the experience of Asian Americans has been dramatically and negatively affected. 58% now say it's more common for people to say racist or racially insensitive things. 39% have acted as if they're uncomfortable around Asian people. 31% say that they've been the subject of slurs or jokes. And really very troubling is that 26% fear physical harm. Now, what's the reality? Well, in today's America, this is our unfortunate reality. Anti-Asian hate crimes have risen. We know that there are damaging effects to our mental health, our concerns about our physical safety, and it's not getting better anytime soon. So we really need to learn how to deal with these issues. You know, we had just this past last week, another hate crimes task force investigation into an attack against an Asian woman who was attacked with a rock. So what can we do? And that's what this program here is about today. We're here to learn about recognizing, responding, and reporting discrimination or bias-based harassment, whether it's happening in the workplace, at schools, in housing, or in places of public accommodation. We've put together a great group of people who can talk about the resources that are available, and I hope that you find all of this information useful and that you can go back to your communities and share with your friends and family members. So without further ado, let me turn this back over, and I hope that you find the information that you get today to be very helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Good evening. My name is Patricia Williamson, and I'm a community relations specialist with the New Jersey Division on Civil Rights. I will be your moderator for tonight's event. So far, you have been greeted by our compelling hosts for this event, Jeffrey Chang, Esquire of AAPI Montclair, and Dr. Denalery Johnson-Fennell of the Division on Civil Rights. And I would like to thank our keynote speaker, Laura Fong, for her historical and powerful remarks. We learned a lot just now about the history of the Asian community in America, and a little more about the implicit bias and how traumatic that can be. And so we want to definitely talk a little bit more about that as we move forward, because implicit biases and microaggressions may seem small, but when accumulated over time, they become a heavy weight for a person to bear. So we want to discuss that a bit more. Thank you so much, Laura. When we discuss stopping Asian hate, we want it stopped in all aspects of our lives, in workplaces, schools, and in communities where we live. One way communities connect is through their houses of worship. Interfaith communication is an important tool to understanding and protecting each other. Our next speaker will discuss some initiatives in this area with resources that may be helpful to you. Etisham Z. Chowdhury is a detective with the New Jersey Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness. Additionally, Mr. Chowdhury, also known as Izzy, serves as a statewide interfaith coordinator and provides support to the New Jersey Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness Interfaith Advisory Council. Let's welcome him as he tells us more about his roles and his office's virtual House of Worship security program. Izzy Chowdhury.
Thank you, Patricia. I really appreciate that. Sorry, I was having a little bit of technical difficulties on that one. I just want to say thank you to the DCR for inviting myself as well as the New Jersey Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness. Before I begin, I really wanted to say thank you to Laura, who provided such a great presentation, both in the historical context as well as how it translates into the current environment. Personally, I was listening to it and it was very brilliantly presented, and I actually learned quite a bit. So just want to say thank you to Laura on that point. So before I begin, I wanted to talk about our office. It's an office within the state of New Jersey. It's known as the New Jersey Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness. The office was established back in 2006 by then Governor John Corzine as an executive order, merging that counterterrorism piece with the preparedness piece. As the current threat environment has transitioned and evolutionized, we have also added the cybersecurity piece, meaning that we here in the state of New Jersey and under the New Jersey Office of Homeland Security have the first cybersecurity cell known as the New Jersey Cybersecurity Communication Integration Cell. And what that is working with the public and private sector, helping to prevent cyber attacks in the state of New Jersey. So when the office was established back in 2006, it was established under a directive. Since then, we've had 7 directors. Our current director is Acting Director Lori Duran, who's amazing, very easy to talk to. She is a cabinet level position appointed by the governor. She's also the Homeland Security Advisor to the governor, very similar to the role that's played by the Homeland Security Advisor to the president. And she is also the chair of the Interfaith Advisory Council, amongst many other roles. So what is the Interfaith Advisory Council? The IAC, or the Interfaith Advisory Council, was established back in 2012. It was poised to bring together both the law enforcement as well as the community, particularly the religious community. So over a period of time, it started with 250 members, and since then we have over 4,000 members, covers all religious communities, as well as all 21 counties. Meets 4 times a year on a quarterly basis, again, chaired by the director, Lori Duran. And we discussed the current threat environment, particularly towards the houses of worship, any issues that are going on, as well as other types of issues amongst themselves. And when there is actually an incident that occurs throughout, whether here, could you say that again? Sorry, I'm having trouble. Whether it occurs in the United States or in New Jersey, the chair, Lori Duran, will actually hold a meeting, a conference call, where members of the ISC can call in. And during that conference call, there's the attorney general's on the phone, as well as the FBI special agent in charge out of the FBI Newark division, the colonel of the state police, as well as the U.S. attorney for the Newark division. We'll discuss what the actual event was, what happened in detail as much as we can, and what we're doing here in the state of New Jersey to make sure the houses of worship here in the state of New Jersey are protected. So what are the type of resources our office offers. So when you go to our website, NewJerseyHomelandSecurity.gov/interfaith, we have all our resources actually listed on one page. The first thing I wanted to discuss was our intelligence products. So because our office is really focused on that cybersecurity piece, we have all our intelligence products actually on our website. So you can look at what are those domestic terrorism threats, what are those international terrorism threats, and what is actually going on both here in the state of New Jersey, nationally, as well as internationally. And then once a year, we actually provide an annual threat assessment for the state of New Jersey, outlining what that current threat stream is, including labeling from top to bottom what those threats are. One of the things we offer in terms of resources are security assessments. So we'll coordinate internally within our office as well as the county and the locals and come out and do a full threat assessment for your house of worship, meaning that we'll come in, go through a full walkthrough and provide you what your security gaps are. That is important, and it's related to our grants. So our office is one of the administrators for two separate grants. So the first is known as a nonprofit security grant program, the NSGP. That particular grant is administered by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA. Over the course of time, the state of New Jersey has been very advanced in terms of working with our houses of worship to get that grant money. Since 2018, we've gone from about $3.5 million to this year in fiscal 2021 to $15 million. That particular grant is focused on target hardening, meaning that you could purchase cameras, doors, locks, fence, lighting, bollards, all for free. Additional to that, the state of New Jersey also offers the New Jersey Nonprofit Security Grant Program. This year, we've allocated $2 million for that. Now, this particular grant is actually twofold. One is the target hardening piece, very similar to the federal NSGP, the Nonprofit Security Grant Program under FEMA. And the second is for security personnel. In other words, you can actually hire supplemental security, whether it is private security, or you can hire law enforcement for extra duty. That particular grant is $50,000 for target hardening and $10,000 for security personnel. If you go on our website, whether it's under NewJerseyHomelandSecurity.gov/grants or the Interfaith tab, it'll actually have all the information related to that those two particular grants. This particular year, we're going to be giving approximately about $17 million just to for houses of worship in terms of that security protection. Now, in addition to that, for those you have seen this advertisement, see something, say something. Our state here in New Jersey is very complicated in terms of law enforcement. In the state of New Jersey, we have 540 plus municipalities with law enforcement, 21 counties with law enforcement, state agencies, and then the federal agency. Because after 9/11, we understood that there was a communication issue between the federal government, actually within the federal government, between the FBI and CIA, but also down to the local level. So what we did here was create what's known as a counterterrorism coordinator program. So every municipality in the state of New Jersey has what's known as a municipal counterterrorism coordinator. When there is an incident, and this incident is based on behavior, we're not looking for any type of profiling, white, black, Asian, any type. We're looking is for a behavior, what's out of place. That information, when you provide it to the local law enforcement, and it goes to the municipal counterterrorism coordinator. Once it goes to the municipal counterterrorism coordinator, it goes to the county counterterrorism coordinator. That information is relayed back to our office to what's known as the Counterterrorism Watch, or the CT Watch. That person inputs it into what's known as the New Jersey SARS system. That's the Suspicious Activity Reporting Database. As soon as that information is entered into that database, that information is automatically shared to the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, specifically the Joint Terrorism Task Force. The reason being is that the FBI, JTTF, is a lead agency in following investigations related to terrorism. We have folks at the FBI, JTTF, will look at the specific SAR and determine, A, is it part of an ongoing investigation, whether here in the state of New Jersey or on a national level? If it is, FBI, having the first right of refusal, will keep that particular SAR, and that information will be provided to the case agent. If not, the FBI also can take that information and actually follow up in terms of mitigating that threat. If not, that particular SAR will come back down to our office. So our detectives, along with the county, as well as the locals, will mitigate every aspect of that in that particular SAR to make sure that is mitigated. So this is very, very important. So in terms of reporting, please report anything you find suspicious. And we have gone further in terms of working with the Bias Crime Unit, with the Attorney General's office, the county, and the locals to get this information into our SARS database. So when you do report this, I assure you, and the reason I'm saying this is I'm also the Bias Crime Liaison for my office, that I see every single one of them. So I can assure you that every single one of these bias crimes or bias incidents are followed up. So this is our contact information. My information is right there. So my partner, Lieutenant John Page, we are the statewide coordinators for the Interfaith Advisory Council. Please be free to reach out to me at any given time. Even if you reach out to the Interfaith email that comes to me anyway, I will absolutely always get back to you. If you require a security assessment, please reach out to me. I will be more than happy to coordinate that for anyone. All the information that I provided today, the resources, any of that information is completely free. Obviously, we're a government agency. There's no charges, there's no fees. Just reach out to me if you have any questions that I can help you with. Please reach out to me at any time. Patricia? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Izzy. Your presentation was very informative, and I really appreciate you providing that information. For more information about OHSP and how they keep us safe, more information about the Interfaith Council and how the AAPI community can become involved, we have provided the information from Izzy's last slide in the chat so that you can use that and contact him through his email, his phone number, and also the Interfaith email address. Thank you so much again, Izzy. I ask all of you to please remember to enter your questions and comments into the Q&A as we go along, and we'll look at them to answer towards the end of the program. Our next two speakers are going to provide you information and insight from the state and federal levels of government. Dave Leonardis is the Training and Outreach Liaison for the Office of the Attorney General, Division of Criminal Justice, Prosecutors, Supervision, and Training Bureau. In that role, he is responsible for specialized training for law enforcement officers as directed by the Attorney General and the Director of the New Jersey Division of Criminal Justice. His duties also include law enforcement and community outreach for the state of New Jersey. Following Dave will be Harpreet Singh Mulka. Harpreet serves as the National Program Manager on issues regarding the Muslim, Arab, Sikh, South Asian, and Hindu, also known as MASA, communities at the Community Relations Service, U.S. Department of Justice. Harpreet works with law enforcement, government, civil rights groups, faith-based groups, and other community organizations across the country to share information and foster dialogues on ways to prevent and respond to alleged hate crimes against MASA communities. Their full biographies are in our program, which we will post online for your review. I present to you first Dave Leonardis and then Harpreet Singh Mocha. Dave.
Thank you, Patricia, and good evening, everybody. I'd like to thank the Division on Civil Rights for inviting me here tonight. I think this is a great event, and I'm happy to be here. The Division of Criminal Justice is the investigative arm for the New Jersey Office of the Attorney General. So since 2019, the Office of the Attorney General has taken a very aggressive approach against bias, really to combat bias. In 2019, the Attorney General's standards on bias incident investigations were updated. And those investigative standards really spell out for all of law enforcement throughout the state how they should investigate a bias incident, steps that they need to take when a bias incident occurs. So, let me just take you through a bias incident, kind of give you a rough thumbnail sketch of what it looks like. So, a member of the Asian community reports to law enforcement that somebody came up to them and maybe uttered a slur in their face. Law enforcement, your local police department will come out and they'll come to the scene. They'll begin an investigation. And as part of that investigation, they take a report. They have to fill out a supplemental bias incident offense report. It's a special report just for bias incidents. They take that report back to their police department, and it has to be submitted to New Jersey State Police Uniform Crime Reporting Unit within a 24-hour period. So once they submit it to the Uniform Crime Reporting Unit within State Police, it not only goes to them, it automatically goes to the respective county prosecutor's office where the offense occurs. It goes to the New Jersey Division of Criminal Justice Bias Crimes Unit, who also works with the prosecutor's offices on investigating bias incidents and bias crimes. And it also goes to New Jersey Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness. You just heard from Detective Chowdhury a moment ago. It'll go to his office so that they can compare it, make sure that there is no nexus to any kind of a terrorism event. So everyone looks at it pretty closely. And at the end of every day, at 4:30 every day, there's a blast email that goes out to every bias crime officer throughout the state. And that blast email will reflect every bias incident that occurred during the course of the day, so that all of the bias crime officers, liaisons throughout the state have visibility what's going on, within that 24-hour period. It's a pretty comprehensive system, as you can well imagine. And in addition to the bias incident investigation standards, the state has taken a very aggressive approach on training law enforcement officers on bias incidents and bias crimes. I'm the vice president of the New Jersey Bias Crime Officers Association. And today we had our annual training for all of the members on bias incidents and crime and bias crime. We actually had 180 members from throughout the state attend today's session. And during today's session, Director Rachel Weiner-Apter, the Director of Division on Civil Rights, received an award from the association. It's a Thomas E. Culp Award for all of the good work that she's done and her office has done when it comes to combating bias in this past year. And it was well deserved. So in addition to training law enforcement officers on bias, our office, along with our partners, like the Division on Civil Rights and the Department of Justice on a federal level and county prosecutors' offices, we've all worked together to train the community members for the past several years. And we've trained literally thousands over the past several years. In 2020, in June of 2020, we conducted a bias awareness session for the Asian community. We had 990 members of the Asian community participate in the virtual training. In September of 2020, our office, again, working with the Division on Civil Rights and the Department of Justice and other partners, ran another training for the Asian community, and we had 500 members attend that session. So when you consider the training that's been done, you can understand part of the reason why the number of bias incidents have risen over the past several years. Now, think about this. 2018 was the greatest year or the greatest number, I should say, for bias incidents in New Jersey. 569 in 2018. Fast forward 2 years to 2020, there's 1,441, almost triple from 2 years earlier. This year, we still have a month to go. We have over 1,600 bias incidents reported. Some of that, I'm sure, is attributed to the times and COVID and events that occurred nationally with civil unrest. And part of it, we'd like to think that it's because of the fact that we in government really stress to the community to please report any incident, no matter how insignificant it may seem to you. So working together is what makes a difference. When you look at the number of bias incidents against the Asian community, in 2019, there were 39. In 2020, and that's through COVID, there were 68 reported. So far this year, we have slightly over 120. So, again, we'd like to think that members of all communities, and particularly the Asian community, are reporting bias incidents when they occur. You look at the locations to where they occur, and it's pretty much proportionate to the Asian population within the various counties. So Bergen being the top number of bias incidents against the Asian community with 36, Middlesex County with 32, Mercer and Monmouth and Somerset all had 15. And then, the numbers go down from there. So we are working together, and we continue to stress to the community to please report any bias incident, and as Detective Chowdhury said, any suspicious activity as well. Report it immediately to your local police department. And we also have a bias hotline. And the bias hotline is staffed 24/7 by our office. It's 800-277-BIAS. That's 2427. So it's 1-800-277-2427. Lastly, we are working with the Asian community and our partners from the New Jersey Asian American Law Enforcement Officers Association. We're almost completed a cultural awareness course on the Asian culture that's going to be offered to the entire law enforcement entity within New Jersey. So that's it. And I'd like to thank you again for having me here tonight.
Thank you, David. Harpreet.
Thank you, Patricia and David. Again, thank you to the New Jersey Division of Civil Rights for inviting me here. My name is Harpreet Singh Moga. I am with the Department of Justice Community Relations Service, which is known as CRS. At CRS, we are known as the peacemakers. We are professional mediators. We mediate, we facilitate, we provide trainings, and we provide best practices that we've learned. We don't litigate, we don't prosecute, and we don't investigate. but we work with our partners in the FBI and U.S. Attorney to address community tensions where there has been claims of discrimination based on race, color, or national origin. That was set by our enabling legislation, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. In 2009, with the passage of the Hate Crimes Act, our jurisdiction increased to do preventative and responsive work in allegations of violent hate crimes as well. So with that, I wanted to also tell you about the 4 programs that I oversee, particularly Protecting Places of Worship forums, where we bring together and facilitate a dialogue where we bring subject matter experts from federal, state, local, and interfaith leaders to come together and talk about processes that have worked and best practices that haven't worked, and how better interfaith communities can work to secure their places of worship and protect themselves in responding and protecting themselves from hate crimes. Additionally, we conduct a hate crimes forums where we educate communities about hate crime prevention, federal, state, and local hate crimes laws, where we invite representatives from those communities, and we talk about resources and what we can do moving forward. Finally, I oversee 2 big training programs, one for the Sikh community and one for the Muslim community, in engaging and building partnerships. As Mr. Leonardis said, we partnered with them in creating a Sikh training for New Jersey law enforcement, which we did, I think, 2 years ago, which was has been a big success. But we also do these nationwide in our programs for law enforcement audiences and non-law enforcement audiences. But to give you just an overview of what to do and how communities can be better able to prevent and respond to hate crimes, I have a small formula that I developed, and it starts with educating. We want communities to educate themselves about not only law enforcement, but the laws that are out there, about your neighbors, about the situation around you, and developing situational awareness. 2, we want folks to engage. I think without engagement, we can't move forward. So engage with law enforcement, get to know who your precinct leader is, get to know who's at your FBI office or at your Attorney General's office, make those contacts, invite them to community centers, invite them to your places of worship. Get to know about programs like my friend Izzy Chaudhry talked about protecting places of worship. There's programs on the federal side and the local side. And we want folks to definitely start to communicate. And the big thing is to have an ongoing communication. And having communication with communities means you have multiple liaisons, both on law enforcement and in the community side. So if one person is gone or gets sick, what have you, you can maintain that communication. With that communication, you want to promote collaborations. What does collaboration mean? We're inviting police to your premises or your place of worship or your community center to talk about what police do and their new programs. And then probably also cross-training and going to the police department and sharing them about your community and how long you've been in this country and unique things about maybe your religious practice and what have you. And inviting them maybe to a service and talking or having law enforcement or even your neighbors or interfaith community address about working together in this world that we live in promoting, or even as something as sharing parking lots when there are high holidays that occur. But definitely communicate, collaborate, and cooperate. Like that parking lot example. And then moving forward, at the end of the day, always keeping in mind to report and go forward, maintain those communications. My mentor always used to say to me, the last thing you want to do is during an emergency is start handing out cards. What you want to do is be proactive and educating yourself, engaging, collaborating, cooperating, and cross-training with these different entities. And then at the end of the day, reporting and moving forward. We at the Department of Justice have a number of resources. We are not the experts. We bring them together. Like we just did a bullying forum in a part of the country where we brought Department of Education, we brought some community leaders to come and talk about bullying prevention. A great website for bullying prevention is called www.stopbullying.gov that has a whole bunch of information on how to prevent bullying, how to address bullying if it comes up, how to have conversations not only with your children, but with faculty, teachers, school leadership, and going forward. And at the Community Relations Service, we can help communities bring all these subject matter expert leaders, the different agencies, whether it be federal, state, or local, together to have a community dialogue where if individual efforts have not been successful, we can definitely bring them together to share what they do and how they can help communities in preventing hate crimes, bullying, or even securing places of worship. So those are great resources. Also, a great resource that we have is justice.gov/hate crimes, which gives an overview of our federal hate crimes, how hate crimes are investigated, and also litigated as well. And definitely, hopefully we'll have those in the link and those will be sent to you later on. But keeping in mind of the time, I wanted to say the Department of Justice Community Relations Service has had a long history of partnering with the Division of Civil Rights, working with the New Jersey FEMA office, working with Mr. Leonardis' office, and we continue to partner up with them in putting on these kind of seminars, and we hope to hopefully be a resource to communities in addressing these issues where they come. But we definitely can create and organize these seminars on a local level where we can address community issues that pop up where there is community tension based on hate crimes that have occurred or are in fear of occurring and going from there. So with that, I wanted to say you can learn more information about the Community Relations Service at justice.gov/CRS, and we can definitely be helpful there. And my information will be also in the chat as well. And I hope you do reach out to us. I want to say to the audience, New Jersey is a best practices state that we share with other states across the country when we do training. There are abundance of resources. What we want and encourage that you take advantage of these free resources that are out there to help you and prevent these things from happening and going from there. And the biggest thing that I can say to you is thank you for joining. But get out there, be situationally aware of your surroundings, get to know your neighbor, get to know your precinct officer, get out there, outreach, help your community out. And we're always a phone call or an email away to help and provide making those connections as well. So with that, I'm gonna end my commentary here and then again, thank the team for inviting me. Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you so much, Harpreet. Breathe. You, I could tell you were really moving on that, and I appreciate you trying to watch the time. That was amazing information. Thank you so much for the insight, your exceptional insight on ways to prevent and respond to the hate crimes against the massive communities. Dave, I'd like to thank you for your informative remarks surrounding where anti-Asian crimes are occurring and also what individuals can do. We thank you both for all you do in the area of stopping Asian hate. We know attacks, incidents, and crimes are traumatic experiences. Next, I am honored to have the opportunity to introduce you to Jessica Kim, who will speak with us about racialized trauma in the Asian community. Jessica Kim, LCSW, CCTP, is a licensed clinical social worker and certified clinical trauma professional with 20 years of experience in agency, school government, and private practice settings, delivering clinical services to youth, adults, and families. As a current PhD student of social welfare at the University of Pennsylvania School of Social Policy and Practice, her research is committed to centering perspectives of Asian American communities in understanding their own mental health needs. And before I welcome Jessica, Before I ask my first question, I just want to remind people, if you have questions, to please put them into the Q&A so that we can continue to gather them, and we'll be able to ask the questions at the end, towards the end of the program. And if you have any direct questions, please send them directly. You can send them to me, you can send them to Tisha, or you can, if you have a technical problem, send it to New Jersey OAG. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you to the Division of Civil Rights for inviting me tonight.
Wonderful. I'm going to start with this first question. Can you explain what trauma is and how it affects someone immediately and over time?
So that's a very big question, but I want to, I guess, start by saying that trauma at its core is a universal human experience. To put it simply, when we're faced with stressors that overwhelm our nervous system, we can experience a variety of physical, emotional, and cognitive reactions. A lot of this is automatic, it's involuntary. Sometimes we're not even aware of our reactions. This can look like fear, shock, confusion, or shame. And some of these effects are short-lived, but others can have a lasting impact on us. And it can affect the way that we perceive and interact with people around us. I think we have a lot of ways of talking about trauma these days. And when most of the general public hears this word trauma, I think they assume that it doesn't pertain to them because they think of trauma in some of its most extreme scenarios. You know, like we think of military combat or exposure to something horrific like rape or murder. And while these things can certainly bring trauma to individuals, there's countless other experiences as well that can induce traumatic effects on people's lives. So I really just want to demystify this word a little bit to say that trauma affects everyone, because ultimately we're talking about the loss of safety. And everyone knows, you know, what that can feel like at some point or another in your life. And if you're an Asian American person, chances are at some point during this pandemic, your sense of basic safety has felt questionable. So that's what we're talking about when we say racialized trauma. You know, maybe it was that you felt self-conscious for the first time at the grocery store, or thought twice about even going. You know, some people stopped taking public transportation on their work commute because they saw, you know, these horrific videos on social media. You know, maybe you called your parents or grandparents. I know I certainly did, you know, asking them not to leave the house by themselves. Some of us started carrying pepper spray around with us, you know, on our keychains. It's like, what is going on? What is this? And so this is what we're talking about when we say racialized trauma or race-based traumatic stress. We're talking about both the emotional and physical reactions to a lot of different scenarios that people of color can have to racism. And this kind of trauma or loss of safety, as I said, can come from things like a direct threat of harm or injury. So we saw a rise in verbal and physical assault in public spaces against Asian Americans during COVID-19. It can come from humiliation and shame, you know, like feeling like you're being scapegoated as a race for bringing the pandemic to this country, right? We experienced that, unfortunately. It can come from witnessing racial discrimination towards other people, you know, who look like you. So it could be vicarious, you know, children watching their parents being talked down to, you know, by other people because English isn't their first language, for example, right? So any one of these incidents, however big or small, can cause distress, both in the short term and in the long term. In the short term, I would say that there can be changes to your mood. Some people have trouble sleeping, maybe you feel socially withdrawn or hypervigilant in public spaces, maybe even avoiding certain places or activities altogether. Some people have a hard time concentrating or have really increased their reliance on substance use, drinking more, or using other drugs to alter their current state. But these effects can also be long-term. And, the reality is that people of color deal with regular, ongoing racial encounters. Sometimes we hear this term microaggression, right? These daily microaggressions, they can build up. They can build up to have a cumulative effect. And that takes a toll on both our mental and physical health. And we know from research that this kind of chronic stress response is really toxic to our bodies and is associated with all kinds of health risks like heart disease, autoimmune disorders, gastrointestinal problems, and on and on. So again, in some racialized trauma, like all trauma, it threatens our sense of safety. It can have both short and long-term effects, both to our physical and mental well-being.
Can you please explain the freeze reaction as opposed to fight or flight that many Asian people who have experienced bias and or racist incidents have?
Okay, so it's a great question. And many of you have probably heard of fight or flight stress response in one context or another. That's a very popular term, fight or flight, fight or flight. Some people, I think, say that term and not really sure what they're talking about. Actually, I've heard it misused a lot of times as well. But essentially, we're referring to our sympathetic nervous system getting activated in response to perceived danger or threat, right? So like your heart starts pounding, your blood pressure goes up, your pupils dilate, palms get sweaty, your mouth dries up. Even public speaking, like I'm doing right now, can activate a fight or flight response. If you don't necessarily like public speaking, pretty much all the ways that our bodies can be on high alert, right? But in contrast to that feeling of activation, a freeze response is when our parasympathetic nervous system kicks in and causes us to shut down. So that can look like dissociating, feeling numb, being stuck. Some people even shut down to the point of fainting, which is part of a freeze response. How many of us have faced or witnessed a racist encounter and froze? Right. So this is maybe you didn't fight back or retaliate, and you also didn't run away. Maybe you literally just stood there and were speechless and paralyzed. Right? Why does our body do this? It's an involuntary reaction that we can have when our bodies decide that we can't overcome this threat and we can't escape it. And so we end up doing nothing. And instead we wait for whatever it is that's threatening us to pass. And this kind of immediate trauma response, it can also impact us in the long term too. I think this freeze response is actually a really common long-term reaction to racism that a lot of Asian Americans default to. And I can actually use myself as an example here. When I read the headlines about the fatal shootings of Asian women at work in Georgia and the massage laws back in March, I did what I did with every other article about anti-Asian violence that I was coming across. I shut down and I was just numb. Like I really just felt nothing. It was like apathy, which was really strange because it wasn't until I started comparing this reaction or lack of reaction really to the response that I had when George Floyd was murdered that I started getting very curious with myself. Because with George Floyd's murder, I was outraged. I talked about it, I protested, I was posting on my social media, right? But with this anti-Asian racism, I was silent and I was detached. And as a therapist, I thought, what's going on here with me? What is this? And so I thought about it for a while. And I think like for many Asian Americans, I felt triggered. I felt triggered back into this old familiar place. And it's this place of learned helplessness against a system that's often made me feel invisible, that's made me feel irrelevant, vulnerable. It's all the ways, growing up that I was conditioned to believe that Asian Americans don't really belong here, that we're not really seen by others as being really American, that nobody cares about whether we experience discrimination or not. It's not relevant, and that nobody's going to do anything about it anyway. We have over 20 different Asian ethnic groups in this country, but we've all been categorically racialized into this one monolithic group, this group that's stereotypically thriving. We're all doing so well, we're overachieving, so that we're not in any position to complain about anything. And our grievances somehow aren't seen as being legitimate. And growing up, I literally don't recall a single adult ever acknowledge that racism against Asian Americans even existed. And yet I felt it all around me all the time. And so that's why I froze, because it's what I had learned to always do, just to survive. Just wait, this too will pass. The reality is that for many Asian Americans, speaking up about our racism has never been taken seriously by anyone, I would say, until now.
And we hear you, and we thank you. We're running a little behind on time, and so I just would like to thank you at this point for your critical insights and creating a pathway to healing for the Asian community. We will have more of Jessica Kim. She has articles and a full bio in our resource document, which is amazing. We were going to talk a little bit about trauma being intergenerational. I would like to mention that Jessica and my colleague Libby Klein will be on a Zoom after this call. If there are additional questions that you may have, there may be something that you heard just now that may have triggered something in you, and you'd like to have a safe space to have that conversation. We will have that, and Jessica and Libby Klein will be there after this call. So at this point, we just like to thank you so much, Jessica, for your, again, your critical insights. And I could listen to you for quite some time and just really, really hear so much more about what is going on in your community and how it actually, in many ways, is very similar to what's going on in my community as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So everyone, at this point, you have heard a lot of information. If you have questions or comments, please remember to put them in the Q&A of the Zoom screen so our screeners can capture them for us. At this time in the program, I'd like to tell you a little more about the New Jersey Division on Civil Rights. So just give me one moment. There we go. Okay, you've already heard a few things from different people. So due to time constraints, I'm going to go through this a little bit quickly. But you've already heard with the New Jersey Division on Civil Rights and the law against discrimination, the three things that I'll touch on briefly are DCR, the context around the LAD, and how to file a complaint with DCR. So the New Jersey Division on Civil Rights was created by the New Jersey legislature in 1945 to prevent and eliminate bias, prejudice, and discrimination in New Jersey. DCR is the state agency charged with enforcing the New Jersey law against discrimination, which I'll call the LAD. It's the first state civil rights statute in the country. And our mission is to prevent, eliminate, and remedy discrimination and bias-based harassment throughout New Jersey. The law against discrimination prohibits discrimination in three major areas: employment, housing and real estate, and places of public accommodation. Many of these are listed here. They include schools, public transportation, theaters, hospitals, prisons. And within that, there's different protected classes. So the law against discrimination prohibits discrimination and harassment based on those that are listed here. I won't read them all, but the ones that we're looking at today primarily are race, national origin, nationality, or ancestry, but any of these are covered with the law against discrimination. In some cases, family status, marital status, or age as well. The DCR enforces the LAD and takes a proactive approach. We have director-initiated investigations and LAD enforcement. We talked a little bit about the fact sheets and statutory amendments. Where I am in the community relations unit, we enforce it through community engagement, outreach, events, and trainings, such as a program like this. And we work directly with communities after civil rights incidents occur. There is a difference between DCR investigations versus criminal investigations. The DCR can investigate discriminations, and we can look and get justice for victims even when the conduct involved does not constitute a crime. In bias-based harassment, criminal investigations focus primarily on the individual perpetrator, whether or not they committed a crime. But DCR investigations focus more so on the employer, the housing provider, or the place of public accommodation. And we are looking to see if they knew about the bias-based harassment and did anything to address it. I believe Dave talked about the difference between a bias incident versus a bias crime. And very briefly, the bias incidents are acts against a person, private or public property, on the basis of 9 protected classes, which are listed here, which are very similar to the ones that we said were in the LAD. The bias crimes are criminal offenses committed with the purpose to intimidate a member of a protected class. And the protected classes are the ones that are up here in terms of the race, color, and all of the others here. Bias or prejudice is the motivation of the criminal offense, and the victim is selected for no reason other than the victim's protected class. All bias crimes are bias incidents, but not all bias incidents are crimes. These are a few bias incidents we wanted to show you as an example in the areas where we are covered. We do cover them through the law against discrimination. Places of public accommodation. This one is and these are real examples. This one is one from a person in Trenton that walked into a store and people shied away from them and was calling the names. Another one is in the schools. And this was one where this is very specific in terms of the pandemic. And a teacher was talking about coronavirus precautions. And the teacher did absolutely nothing to intervene. This was in Seattle, Washington. In the workplace, in Monterey, both of these are in California. In the workplace, this particular person was of Asian American descent and had an allergy flare up. A woman told her not to touch anything in terms of the food, but this person also noticed that other people in the conference were sneezing, sniffling, and coughing, and nothing was being said to them. And in housing, it also in California, this person reported for their 70-year-old mother, and a person from a nearby apartment was shouting at her for several minutes in a public area of the building. And mentioned the Chinese, people dying because of them, and the virus, presumably COVID-19. These are all biased incidents. Now, these next three are incidents that are not in DCR's jurisdiction. This first one is in January, a man approached an Asian woman on the street and told her to go back to China and referred to her with an anti-Asian slur, and he also spat in her direction. Because he's on the street, which is open, that's not in DCR's jurisdiction. It's not a place of public accommodation. The next one, spray painted anti-Asian graffiti was reported on the sidewalk outside an apartment building. Same reason. The third one, the mainland student network at the University of Virginia reported that 2 Chinese international students were attacked by assailants who threw raw eggs at them from a moving vehicle. This is in Charlottesville, Virginia. So this would not be under the New Jersey Division on Civil Rights jurisdiction because it is in Virginia. Having said this, all 3 of these should be reported to the police. In no way should this be swept under the rug and nothing done about it. Absolutely report those. What information do you need to file a complaint? These are, we need the facts. We need as much information that you can provide, copies of any documents that support your complaint, contact information, names of witnesses or of people that have actually discriminated against you, documents, photos, text messages, emails, anything. There's 2 sections, I'm not going to read this, 2 parts of the DCR process. One part is intake, the other part, well, I'll get to the other part in a second. The first part is intake, and we'll put this in the chat, but in order to file a complaint, first you have to submit an intake form, and you can do that online through our NJ Bias group, through our NJ Bias system. You can call our number. You can also email us. And if we do have jurisdiction over your complaint, we will prepare a verified complaint form for your signature. The dates were extended due to the public health emergency. And so that's why this says after September 11th, 2019. Normally it would be 180 days from the time of the actual event. The next part of the process is the investigation, where DCR will serve your complaint on the respondent. They'll have a chance to respond to their version of events, and then DCR will conduct an investigation. That would include interviews with you, the respondent, and witnesses, and a review of all of the documents that we mentioned earlier that you need to support your case. If DCR finds probable cause, you can receive equitable relief. You can receive monetary damages, and the person who did the incident could receive statutory penalties. So how do you get help from DCR? Come to our website, www.njcivilrights.gov, and let us walk you through the NJ Bias Investigation Access System. Let us have a conversation with you so we can determine what is happening. We want to advise you, New Jersey Division on Civil Rights and its employees do not provide legal counsel or legal advice. And this is for informational purposes only. So again, our information is in the lower left-hand corner. And at this point, what I would like to do is, and we're also putting that in the chat, but what I'd like to do now is introduce you to Lubna. Let me see where she is. Lubna Kazi Chowdhury, who is one of my colleagues that's in the Strategic Initiatives and Enforcement Unit, which is part of a different part of the Division on Civil Rights. And she will continue this conversation about what we do in DCR. Lubna?
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, everyone. And I would like to start with saying namaste, namaskar, sat sri akal, and salam or assalamu alaikum. These are my welcome words for the languages that are spoken in my Aapi community and my Aapi family. And I'm excited to be able to introduce you all to what we do here at the Division on Civil Rights. First and foremost, my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And as Patricia mentioned, I'm a legal specialist with the Strategic Initiatives and Enforcement Unit, or as we like to call it, SIE. And we are at the Division on Civil Rights, or DCR. I was born as an Indian national in Kuwait, and my parents, both who are Indian, an engineer and a homemaker, are of Indian origin as well. And I have lived in New Jersey for the last 16 years, and I've been part of the New Jersey Aapi community, which currently comprises now of 10% of the New Jersey population, and also the third highest proportion in the country. So kudos to all of us. I empathize also with the same concerns that your families experience when it comes to facing discrimination. And it is my sincere goal to ensure and introduce you to how we at DCR continue to fight discrimination. And thank you to Patricia again for going over the details of the LAD. I know this is some detailed information, and we want to assure you that even as an attorney prior to working for the DCR, I did not know the specifics of the LAD. And most of our community members do not know the basics of the LAD. So education is key for this topic. Under the unit that I work with, there are two broad ways that we work toward fulfilling DCR's mission to eliminate and prevent discrimination in New Jersey, specifically through our reactive work and our proactive work. So this unit with SIE is involved in proactive work. We work to proactively investigate and prevent discrimination, bias, and hate, and address more systemic issues that can't necessarily be addressed by individual complaints. So essentially, we do not always wait until discrimination takes place. Rather, we research and work on amending rules, which is very important, that contribute to systemic patterns and discrimination achieved through 3 of the new units. In other words, we're a group of attorneys and professionals who are passionate about preventing and stopping discrimination. And we use 3 types of tools to carry out our mission. For example, policy. Here we amend or make amendments to the existing LAD. We promulgate regulations. We issue guidance documents that explain law to ensure people can have the understanding on how to avoid discrimination. We also continue to revise and provide guidance so that existing policies, which are not really meant to be discriminatory, but have a discriminatory impact, are recognized. So for example, an employer who has a policy or a prohibition on, for example, hats or head coverings that did not allow an exception for employees to wear hijabs or turbans or pagris or other religious articles or articles of faith, the policy would likely be unlawful because it would likely be unnecessary to achieve a substantial, legitimate, or non-discriminatory interest. Now, even if the employer comes back and says or proves that the standards or such policies would still be unlawful, if the complainant could come back and say, you know what, there were less discriminatory, equally effective alternative ways to achieve the same interest. Another tool that we also use here at SIE is called the investigative tool. As Patricia mentioned, the director who is the head of our agency or DCR has the power to open investigations on their own. We call these director-initiated investigations or director-initiated complaint. When we become aware of potential violations of the LAD, for example, if we learn from the media or partner organizations or policy reports, we can request information from an entity, conduct formal investigations with our DAGs or attorney generals or trial attorneys, as we call them for our agencies, to carry out that investigation. For example, if we had a situation where an entity was discriminating against the Aapi community, we can commence a director-initiated complaint and carry out the investigation, which could result in settlement or an agreement to stop the discriminatory act, for example, or we can initiate legal action. At other times, when we hear about incidents, we may work with advocacy organizations to address any of that prior to initiating an investigation. And lastly, our third tool is a public outreach or an educational tool, such as the one we're having currently: presentations, fact sheets, reports. We issue reports that analyze civil rights issues. We host listening sessions. We also draft things such as youth bias task force reports. We publish something called the Bias Incident Report, which we are working on the 2020 version currently, and we will demonstrate a rise of bias incidents against the Aapi community. My colleagues and I at SIE also work on other topics. We're researching existing systemic practices of discrimination. So for example, practices that have been around for a long time, but we've never realized, or only until recently have realized, the discriminatory impact on a group. And we also produce educational material for the public. So for example, currently I'm working on some great items, for example, health equity for the Aapi community. I know as a child, it's always been a passion of mine to make sure that there's equality even when accessing healthcare. So we're working on ensuring that we can find the gaps as to where discrimination lies. We have also provided rules about the Family Leave Act, for example, so that one's rights and employers' obligations are spelled out clearly as well. Lastly, I want to leave you with a reminder, just like Jessica did. This past year, I know that our Aapi community saw some troubling times and heightened discrimination. Some of us were the subject of hate and violence that shook our lives. And I want to empower our community to speak up and really more specifically complain when discrimination hits home. Patricia's gone over the process of making the complaints. It is crucial for you to report any acts of discrimination that happened to you or your family, or if you witnessed the same. I know this phrase really well. We're taught not to speak out. It's ingrained in my DNA and yours, and it's in our culture. I heard it when I complained to my parents about, being bullied on the bus or at school or at my first job. Just ignore them and work hard. That was the mantra. I know it really well. But it's not a remedy. And I want you all to be empowered to speak up. And why? It's because I want to make a change to change the future Aapi generations. And I know you all do as well. We must overcome discrimination and we must recognize our rights. So I implore you to report. Finally, please ensure to visit DCR's website. We have a lot of great information there. And any questions that you want to be answered should usually be answered on the website or contact one of us. Thank you so much. Alvida, Niropa, wassalam, and walaikum salam.
Thank you so much, Lubna. Thank you so much. We are going to move right into our youth advocacy moment. Christina Huang and Siddharth Satish are definitely two high school students that know how to use their voices. They are speaking up, as Lubna just mentioned. Christina Huang is a first-generation Chinese American student at Ridgewood High School. She started the Students of Color Alliance Club at her high school to facilitate a safe environment and build solidarity among students of color. Siddharth Satish is a rising senior at West Windsor Plainsboro High School North, who is engaged in interdisciplinary study and advocacy, focusing on the confluence of politics, international relations, economics, and health inequity. Siddharth is the co-founder and president of their NAACP Youth Council. I'd like to welcome Christina and Siddharth.
Thank you so much, Patricia. And thank
Okay. Wait, are both of you up?
Yeah.
I have one question for the both of you. And whoever wants to go first can go first. What have you done in your high school and or community to advocate for an anti-racist society?
Thank you so much, Patricia. I think I jumped the gun there for just a second. But nevertheless, hi, everyone. My name is Siddharth. And to answer the question quite plainly, one of the major things I've done to advocate for the AAPI community as well as for racial inequity is found the NAACP Youth Council for West Windsor. And to do this and to be involved in an organization that advocates for the rights of colored persons and being one of the few Asian Americans as a part of this organization has taught me one thing, that as a community, it's often hard for Asian Americans to find themselves and call themselves people of color and get involved in these communities because for so long we've been left out of the conversation, felt like we don't really have a voice or belong. And when Ms. Kazi Chowdhury was explaining this whole precedent through which Asian children and minority children are often told not to speak up about the things that they experience, that's reminiscent a lot about how I grew up and how I was told to respond to such acts within my own life. So that's one mechanism through which I've tried to solve the problem of bias within my own community. The second and last one I want to touch upon before handing the floor over to Christina is using the power of the international community in order to advocate for racial inequity. Because the problem isn't just limited to our own townships and communities, it spreads far beyond. And to do this, I've had the opportunity to work with entities like the United Nations, but more specifically, their High Commissioner on Human Rights, who focus on things like racial inequity and publish reports to them to highlight the dire state that the United States is in, but also many of our foreign counterparts are in. So through education and advocacy, both of which I'm glad enough to have been given the platform and access to through the NAACP, I've been able to advocate for racial equality. Over to you, Christina.
Thank you, Siddharth. Christina, same question.
Oh, thank you so much. That's very inspiring to listen to you, what you've done and how you're kind of using your voice, Siddharth. So I'm Christina, and I noticed after the COVID pandemic that a lot of anti-Asian racism was happening in my community and just around the across the US. And so I sat down and talked with my teacher about what I was seeing and things that my classmates were uncomfortable with. And so after like many conversations, she invited me to speak at a rally in my town, which prompted, I guess, like motivation for me to continue this work and to continue advocating for students like myself. And so I joined Make Us Visible New Jersey, which is an organization that wants to amplify Asian American voices and to make sure that we have representation in the classroom. So my purpose, or what I aim to do, is to push the youth to speak out about things that we're told not to speak about, or things that are kind of pushed away, as I guess with like things like the model minority myth. So I try to use social media and I guess like Facebook and Instagram and just post people's stories. And recently, at the beginning of November, I went to the New Jersey State House to testify in front of senators about my experiences and speak on behalf of other Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders about having, including Asian American studies in the classroom, so students feel better, like they can see themselves in textbooks, and I guess get more involved and to empower the youth.
Oh, my wow was muted. Wow. and that's for both of you. I am so thankful that you and others are our future. So thank you so much for using your voice. That is exactly what we, some of us twice and 3 times your age, need to do. And so I'm so glad you're starting right now. We look forward to hearing and seeing much more from both of you, and just know that you have our support. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. And so now, audience, I'm going to turn this over to you for question and answers. We will look for your questions in the Q&A section of the chat. Thank you to those that submitted questions as you registered. We have tried to answer some of your questions in our remarks. If we did not, please feel free to add it to the Q&A so we can begin to answer them now. We will get to as many as we can, but please contact us at communityrelations@njcivilrights.gov if we are unable to get to your question tonight. Also, if it is more of a very specific or personal nature, please reach out to us at communityrelations@njcivilrights.gov so that we can address it one-to-one instead of a group. We'd like to preserve your privacy. So what I am seeing here, okay, I'm going to actually start with the second question I see and come back. So Detective Chowdhury, Izzy, would you be able to briefly outline any steps houses of worship attended by AAPIs or other people of color should take to prepare against domestic terrorism threats? That's the first portion. And then the next, I'm not sure if you're able to see this, but are OHSP's resources translated into other languages? I'm thinking of some local houses of worship with majority first generation AAPI populations who may not be able to access the important information and resources you shared tonight because of language barriers. Thank you.
Hi, Patricia. Thank you. So to answer the first part of that, there's been a evolution in terms of the radicalization between international and domestic terrorism. So that evolution is that domestic terrorism actually have taken the playbook from the international side in terms of the radicalization. That being said, certain groups have more of an outstanding threat from the international terrorism side, as well as the domestic terrorism side. That being said, all the security measures that I talked about earlier, so in terms of that prevention piece, I would say it's very important to get that threat assessment done. Please reach out to me. I'm more than happy to coordinate that, right? So the whole thing is that you have to understand what your gaps are and how do you fix that. So some of those gaps can be fixed internally. That doesn't cost a lot of money. When that's the case, it does cost money, right? Those grants are in place. So they are competitive, but we have numerous resources out there, including videos on our website of how to apply for those grants, showing you the outline. And over the years, I've developed those relationships with numerous organizations that I can certainly put you in contact to help you write those grants, because they're not easy. So I'd be more than happy to do that. In terms of that language barrier, personally, I speak numerous languages, so I can certainly help on that account. If not, again, we've been working with numerous organizations over the years, and many, and as myself being an immigrant, I came here when I was 5. I understand that whole side of it. Grew up as an immigrant. My parents barely speak English at this point, 4 years later. So totally understand that, have dealt with that over numerous years, and we could definitely work through that. Not a big deal. Even those, outside of that South Asian community that I'm part of, certainly put in contact with other members of the community where we can help kind of mitigate that aspect of it. I think I kind of answered both of those, but yeah, reach out to me. Whatever the issues are, it's very much individualized. So it's not like one blanketed type of resources we provide. It's very individualized. And a lot of the folks that are on this Zoom call, it's not the first time we met. I think Dave Leonardis earlier had mentioned that. I work with Harpreet all the time. I work with Dave all the time. Patricia, obviously, we've met numerous occasions. So, and other members of law enforcement on my side, work with them on a regular basis on numerous capacities. So we'll work together, and that's the whole thing, right? It's that coordination piece on various levels, and it's very much customer service oriented. So what you need, we'll provide it in whatever way we need to do that.
Patricia, if I
Thank
could just
you.
add,
Yes, Harpreet.
we have that Protecting Places of Worship Forum where we bring federal, state, and local resources all together. And that's a great place where communities can start learning about all the laws out there, the resources out there, and actually outreach and create connections with not only Izzy, but others from the FBI, your local law enforcement, everything else like that. And we can provide that in different languages. We've done it virtually, and we do it, well, we have done it in the live in the past. We're doing it virtually now, but definitely if there are language issues, barriers, we can definitely have a translator. We've done that in the past as well, but that's a great program that's out there as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, what data can be shared in regards to AAPI related bias incidents in our public schools? And what steps are being taken to address them at the state, county, or local level? Would any of our panelists like to come on camera and answer that question, please? What data can be shared in regards to AAPI-related bias incidents in our public schools? And what steps are being taken to address them at the state, county, or local level?
So Patricia, I'll answer some of that question.
Okay.
The bias report, there's yearly bias reports, and Dave can follow up on this as well. That comes out every year, that's available to the public. In terms of that juvenile side of things, there was a bias youth group put together. Obviously, I'm sure you're aware of that. I happen to be actually a member of the Youth Bias Task Force, Law Enforcement Department of Education, and we're working on setting some of those protocols in place. So there is actually, on the state level, working with our county and local partners, that we are definitively working on making and addressing some of those issues.
Okay, thank you. And then this last question I'm going to give to you, Dave. It's pretty straightforward. Does the bias reporting hotline that you mentioned, Dave, have foreign language speakers available to translate?
To answer that question, yes, we are. We've developed it, in 9 different languages. And if it's not in place, it is very close to being in place. It may be in place right now. I'll be honest with you, have to check on it. But we've been working on it for the last year to get it in place. So the short answer is yes, if it's not there, we'll be there shortly. And then secondly, to follow up on what Detective Shadri was talking about, the Department of Education produces a HIB report every year. It's harassment, intimidation, and bias. Very comprehensive report. So any harassment, intimidation, bias, or bullying, I should say, incident that occurs in a school is reported to the Department of Education, and they have a very comprehensive report that they produce every year. It's got a breakdown, for all different sorts. And then lastly, I think, Laura, did you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Thanks. The New Jersey has a very progressive and broad harassment, intimidation, and bias reporting mechanism, a set of laws that applies to New Jersey public schools. It isn't applicable to the private school sector, but it is applicable to all public schools. I'm a former school board member. I can tell you that every school board gets a regular local school district report with respect to HIB incidents that have occurred in that district. There's a formalized process with respect to how they're supposed to be reported and timeframes within which they're supposed to be reported, and local resources in the school district for that coordination and reporting mechanism. If you go, I had put it in the chat, I don't know if people saw it, but there is on the Department of Education website a page that provides resources about the HIB law, about parental resources that are available, about fact sheets and whatnot. So there's a set of laws that's specific to our public school students that relates to HIB. And so I would just, refer folks to that resource if they're looking for what the contours of the law are, what they can do, if it's happening in your school district, what you might be able to avail yourself of. But even if that website doesn't answer all of your questions, there should be a local HIB coordinator in every public school district who should be able to answer those questions.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, David, and thank you to all of you that have asked questions. We're coming to the end of the program. I have been checking the chat, and I see that some of the questions that are not answered, we do have your contact information, and so we can reach out and talk with you personally and help to answer the rest of those questions. As we conclude, we invite you to evaluate this program by taking the brief survey we're about to drop into the chat right now. As you are completing the survey, we're going to receive closing remarks from two of our AAPI community partners, Amy Koteng, founding board member of the Fort Lee Chinese American Community Association, followed by Dr. Connie Elangovan, founder of Make Us Visible, New Jersey. Amy?
Thank you, Patricia. I just want to thank everyone for carving out an incredible, valuable time of your evening. We all have tremendous demand on our time. Multiple us have different roles: mother, father, husband, and wife. So I want to thank you all for making time and making your voices and sharing your ideas. I grew up as an immigrant in Fort Lee, feeling that I was invisible. And tonight I saw many of our experts. And one of the most comforting things for me tonight was to see people of different shades of minority coming together. Being minority sometimes feels like you're the only single minority race on earth. And so to see all of you with different cultural background coming together and sharing our humanity means so much, offers so much comfort to me, that we are not doing this alone and that there is strength in number. And I know that for myself, growing up, when I see other minorities being singled out, there is a almost an embarrassing sense of like relief that this time it's not me, it's another minority. When in effect, one minority group is targeted, all of us are. So thank you so very much for coming together tonight and sharing your expertise, your challenge. Jessica said earlier, I've never heard trauma being framed in a way that is so relatable, so personal, that it didn't stir up a whole list and whole host of emotion within me. I hope that this event tonight continues in our life. I invited friends to join tonight. I hope we continue to invite our friends, our family to stay active in this topic, and that we make small changes in our community. And when these changes add up, that we create bigger impact, grassroots impact that would cause more macro changes in our legislative body and in our community. Thank you all tonight.
Thank you so much, Amy. Dr. Connie?
Yes, thank you so much. I feel very grateful to this wonderful panel for the amazing work that you do in our community and the excellent resources you've shared. Thank you for all the ways you're healing our community. The negative mental health impacts of anti-Asian racism should not be ignored or minimized. Many Asian Americans feel heightened fear, perceived danger, and feelings of helplessness as a result of increased anti-Asian hate, and it impacts their mental health and social connections. But at the same time, it's important to recognize and further promote Asian Americans' healing and resistant practices, such as reporting incidents and seeking social and community support. For example, about 28% of Asian Americans who reported racial trauma after the hate incident no longer met criteria for race-based trauma. So this suggests that reporting is one important strategy for Asian Americans to cope with hate incidents. I wanted to share another strategy with you, which is working with the trauma in your body. I'd like to share with you a meditation from Dr. Jasmine Ang McHale, a psychologist and activist. I invite you to join me in a brief meditation to ground us to free our energy and rally our resources. I invite you to either close your eyes, or if you prefer, simply soften your gaze and turn your focus and your attention inwards. Draw your attention to your breath. Be present to yourself now. So many of us have been doing, planning, and solving without end. Be here now, in this moment, when your only call is to be present within yourself. Present for the parts that grieve, for the parts that are afraid, for the parts that rage, for the parts that despair, for the parts that feel helpless, for the parts that are tired, for the parts that hope, and for the parts that long and ache for a better world. Be present to all the parts of yourself. Notice where you've been holding them in your body, static and heavy. Breathe into those places inside of you. Let your breath be like a golden light, opening up the hardened, heavy places inside, loosening, swirling, filling your belly, filling your heart center, expanding, nourishing and life-giving. Let that breath fill you. Imagine that you breathe that expanding golden energy all around you. We know there is hate. We've felt it sting, but we also know there's love. Turn your attention outward now to all of us here together in community. Let your attention and loving energy expand to all of those among us. Let it light up all of us in this community. Because we bring love, we bring change. Because we are here, one community, resolved and ready for the work ahead. I thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you all for the wonderful work you do.
Thank you so much, Dr. Connie, and thank you. Sorry, trying to do all of this at the same time. Thank you so much, Dr. Connie, and thank you so much, Amy. And I just want to, I'm going to ask the panelists to please take themselves off camera once more as I'm showing this, as I'm finishing showing this slide. I'd just like to thank all of our participants for today, this evening. You heard a lot of information, but I hope within this you did hear something that you can take back to your community. And I also want to mention, before I take this slide down, we have 2 additional resources that you did not hear from today. One is Farn Yi Fu, who is a Deputy Attorney General within the New Jersey Attorney General's office. And we did mention my colleague before, Libby Klein. She's a community relations specialist, but also a mental health resource to all of us here. And so what I'd like to do, and just in closing, we hope that you have heard something tonight to stop Asian hate. Know your rights, your civil rights, use your voice, create pathways for healing. And again, I'd like to thank all of our presenters for bringing your historical, educational, thoughtful, and powerful information. Libby, I'd just like to remind you that Libby is going to be with Jessica in our safe space room. If you're interested in joining them to discuss additional mental health resources, the link to join is provided in the chat. We'd also like to remind you to take our civil rights statement, some would call it a pledge, and just let us know what civil rights means to you and what you're going to do about it. Finally, we'd like to thank you, our audience. As Harpreet Mocha said, educate, engage, and communicate, collaborate, and cooperate. You are the trusted ambassadors that will take this information into your workplaces, schools, and communities. Know your rights, use your voice, and create pathways to healing. In doing this, we will move mightily towards stopping Asian hate. Thank you. Have a good night. I'm going to ask your panelists not to leave. We'd like to take a group picture after the recording stops.